So this is going to be a presentation without any slides, without any video, without anything. So if you want to fall asleep, you can. It's just me droning and moaning away, okay? But everything I say, you will be able to access at those two addresses. So if you go to my website and add /100, there's going to be a section called the future. So everything I'm going to be speaking about is in that section called the future. All of those pieces are from a free thought letter I write every Sunday, which is read by about 30,000 executives. And it is, believe it or not, completely free. It's even free of advertising, free of anything. And that's at rishad.substack.com. If you want to hear me interview people about the future, including all kinds of people from all over the world, there's, again, a free podcast on any platform. It's called What Next? And you can look at that. And my book has been basically mentioned. So that's there. I have a very simple Twitter handle, as long as Twitter still stays in business, which is @Rishad. And since I think Google will stay in business, my email is simply my first name @gmail.com, which are all early indicators of me being an early adopter. Right? So maybe I knew something about the future. So with that being said, why should we care about the future? It's a very simple question. And we have challenges enough today. We're haunted by our past. We have all kinds of things. So why muddle it up and care about the future? The only reason we want to care about the future is because we're going to spend the rest of our lives there. And that includes tomorrow, because tomorrow is the future. So as long as you're alive, you're going to spend the rest of your life in the future. So it kind of would make sense to care about the future. So that's one reason. But all of you all are successful business people, successful entrepreneurs, successful everything. And one of the words that often you all use is a word called strategy. Almost every business executive often says strategic, strategy, strategist. And very few say tactical, execution, or things like that. Now, I happen to have been the chief strategist of what today is a 100,000 person organization. And I was terrified that someone would come to me and ask me, what are you the chief of? Right? So you're chief strategist. So what is that? Which means, can you please describe what the word strategy means? So I'll ask you, what does the word strategy mean? So I decided, before someone would ask me a question and I gave them a dumb answer, I would go ask people who are smart for good answers. And then I would, like any good person, copy those answers and say, that's what it is. Right? So I sent out a SOS, bat signal, to colleagues at consulting firms, like Bain and McKinsey and BCG, to corporate strategists that I knew, to university professors who taught strategy, and they all gave me answers. And I got the equivalent of about 50 pages of answers. And then I decided that that was too much, because if I gave an answer which required me to speak for an hour to answer what a strategy is, you would say, you clearly don't know what strategy is. So I went to the other extreme, and after reading all of that, decided that possibly the best strategist in the world was actually a gentleman, and since you all are in Canada, you all may know him, called William Shakespeare. So for those of you who may not be aware, he was a playwright and poet who died a long time ago. like 500 years ago. But he had a line in Julius Caesar called "Take the current when it serves, or prepare to lose thy ventures," which I decided was the best definition of strategy. So strategy is 3 words: future, competitive, advantage. That's it. 3 words: future, competitive, advantage. What does that mean? It means, what will your marketplace look like in the future? Specifically, what will your potential consumers, customers, members, guests, whatever you call them, look like and need in the future? That's number 1. Who will you be competing with in the future? And against those future needs and those future competitors, what advantage will you provide? That's simple. Which is the other reason you have to worry about the future, because if you aren't thinking about the future, you aren't doing strategy. I don't know what people are doing, but if it isn't about future competitive advantage, it's not strategy. It's something totally weird. Okay? And most companies, when they do strategy, don't think about it that way, and they end up in trouble because they end up being weird. And I'll show you some examples of companies that actually didn't think about it this way and ran into trouble. So you might say, okay, future competitive advantage, very, very good. Now, pray, what crystal ball exists that allows me to tell the future? And Rishad, if you knew so much about the future, did you know that for 3 years we'd be wearing masks? Did you know that a crazy guy would start a land war in Europe? Did you know that the Cubs would actually win a baseball World Series? And the answer to all of those is no. But going back to Shakespeare, take the current when it serves, or prepare to lose thy endeavors. What is very clear are the trends. So basically what he was saying is, man or woman, make the trend your friend. So if you align with the trend, your likelihood of being successful is far greater than if you don't align with the trend. A mediocre person aligning with the trend will beat a very smart person who doesn't align with the trend. Someone who has no sales experience could sell word processors, and someone with world-class world experience could not sell typewriters when the age of digital technology came. Right? Successful businesses that move early on a trend, not so early that you get burnt, but early on a trend, are likely to succeed much more than businesses that stay on what they currently are doing. And those trends are very, very clear. And there are 4 of them. And these are 4 trends I suggest every business, every company, and even every individual align their sales with. These are for sure. Right? I will bet everything that these are going to happen. And they're broad enough, so they're not so specific like who's going to win the World Series or things like that. But they're broad enough for me to be quite comfortable because they're not too narrow. So what are those 4? I'll give you what those 4 are and then describe in more detail how to sort of think about them. The first one is globalization. The second one is demographic shifts, surprising demographic shifts. The third one is a new age of technology that's coming. And the last one is how work is going to be reinvented. So those are 4 that I'm very clear about. And you will learn more about those details. Obviously, I'm going to speak about it, but if you want notes, just go to that rishadtobaccowala.com/100 and read The Future. And you'll get more on it, but I'm going to describe it, but if you want it. Okay, let's start with globalization. The good news is you're in Canada and not in the United States. But even Canada, North America, Europe, if you read The Economist and the Financial Times and the Wall Street Journal, they all are tearing the head out and hair out also, and basically saying this is the end of globalization. And what are some of the things that they bring forth? China, rise of nationalism, all kinds of things. And all I say is, are you kidding me? All that's happened is we've moved from a world where we had unipolar globalization dominated by the Western world, primarily Western Europe and North America, and are replacing it with multipolar globalization. In fact, the world's becoming more global because it's not centralized to one region. Over the last, between 1990 and today, 2.5 billion people have come out of poverty because of globalization. The entire Western world, which is North America, less Mexico, and all of Europe, is 800 billion people. This week, global population turned to 8 billion people. Make the math quite simple. 10% of the world, 90% of the world. So 10% is going to define what globalization means? No. We basically have a global world order built on 1945. The country that I grew up in is about to have a bigger population than China. At the current time, has the world's fastest growing economy, is the largest user of Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, and has more engineers than anywhere in the world, and does not have a seat in the Security Council, but little countries like Britain and France do. How's that fair? How's that fair? Well, that's because it was all defined in 1945. But we're living in 2022. We're not living in 1945, which is why globalization is going to happen. Because if you think about it, demographics make the rest of the world rise. Currently, the basic belief is the world's population will peak at 10 billion. From 8 to 10 billion, almost all that growth is taking place in one place, Africa. That's it. Nowhere else. So globalization is happening. It's, however, multipolar globalization. And even someone like the United States, unlike China, or rather unlike Canada, so Canada actually is pro-immigration. The United States has decided to commit suicide and become anti-immigration. If the United States is actually going to compete with China, it can't do it without immigration. It just can't. Because of the second big shift, which are demographic shifts. The population of the Western world, and China, and Korea, and Japan, so everything but India and Africa, has begun to go into decline. The United States grew by 1 million people last year, which is the smallest growth ever. 17 million people in the last 10 years, the smallest growth ever. It takes 2.1 children to keep the population the same. That number in California is 1.7. That number in Korea is 1.3. That number in Japan is 1.4. That number in Germany is 1.5. The population of the world is in decline, excepting for Africa and India. And in India, it's going to peak faster than most people think. So that's the first part. Every business plan has been built on increasing population. What happens when that doesn't happen? GDP growth is productivity plus population growth. What happens when that doesn't happen? And it's not happening. One of the reasons that China is behaving the way it does is at current projections, we have long passed peak China. China's population at current projections is going to decline by 50% in the next 50 years. Because of the one-child policy, which they cannot fix, now they've said, okay, forget about one child, two child, have 3 children. No one's having no children. It's too expensive. And so what you basically have is a country which population is in decline. In Korea, they're closing down schools. There's nobody to go to schools. But no one talks about that, right? Now, how about this? If that wasn't a challenge enough, the entire world is aging. By 2050, 1 out of every 6 people in the world will be over 65 years old. In 5 years, 1 out of every 3 people in China will be over 65 years old. In the United States, in 10 years, 1 out of every 4 people will be over 65 years old. Declining, flattening population and aging populations is a fact. And these things don't change all of a sudden. You suddenly can't change it. It's a trend you can see. So 8 billion, 800 million tells you something. Declining population, aging population tells you something. I would basically make sure my business is global. I would make sure that my business understood that yes, while Gen Z and millennials are intensely important for a variety of reasons, most of the wealth in countries like the United States and Canada, 75% of it, is held by people over 50 years old. And most of them are going to live productively and happy till 85. And we have learned how to change our behavior as COVID showed. And therefore, a fixation on youth as the next market may not be actually very cool. That's not where the money is. The money is with the older people. And the older people, because of good health care, breakthroughs in cancer, are not dying at 65 and handing it over to the millennials. It's not going to happen. So that's fact number 2. Number 3 trend, a little thing called technology. Now, technology has been around for a long, long time. Fire and wheel and all kinds of stuff. So I'm going to forget all of that. And I'm going to basically just fast forward to 1993. So 1993 is when we entered the first connected age of technology. And it was when Tim Berners-Lee and Son made the World Wide Web available for everybody, license-free. That's when this began. Now, I happen to have taken marketers onto things like America Online and stuff like that. And I do realize there was online and DARPANet and all of that before. But the first connected age began in 1993. And between 1993 and 2007, we lived in the first connected age, where as human beings, we did 2 things. We connected to discover, and we connected to transact. In our businesses, we call that search and e-commerce. In North America, the dominant companies for that are called Google and Amazon. In 2007, we built on those first connected age, and we entered the second connected age. And in the second connected age, we had 3 new forms of connection. We were now connected to everybody, connected all the time, and connected to distraction. All human connections. We call that social, mobile, and streaming, also known as Apple, Meta, and Netflix. And if you go back to about 6 or 8 months from today, those are the 5 most valuable companies in the Western world. They're not technology companies. They basically give human beings godlike power because human beings like to connect. And these are the companies that made connection friction-free. What we were not watching, and which is what I'm now going to boardrooms all over the world and saying, and because I actually told people about the first and second connected ages, now in my atrophied and older state, when I get wheeled into a conference room, besides saying, okay, he's an unemployed, starving author, why should we listen to him? I'll say, I don't know, a long time ago I said something and I'm about to say something else. And what I'm about to say may sound very strange and weird and not exactly what the headlines say, but give me a listen. So they pat me on the head, give me a little food, and I give them a listen. So I'm going to give you that, okay? We have entered the third connected age 3, 4, 5 years ago. I'm not sure because I'm not exactly sure. But there are 4 forms of connection that are now happening. So remember, the first one had 2, the second one had 3. And by the way, they're all alive. None of them have died. But the new ones are coming. And you know how dramatic society and business and news and everything changed because of that, right? The first 2. So now imagine the third one. So in the third, here are the connections. Data connecting to data, which is the flavor of AI that actually works really well. It's called machine learning. And a simple way of thinking about it is the following statistics. 1 out of every $3 of Amazon's revenue that takes place in their store. So I'm not talking all of Amazon's revenue, because most of their revenue and profits are on Amazon Web Services, etc. But on Amazon.com, 1 out of every $3 that Amazon gets is after you have checked out. So you go to buy something, you check out. 1/3 of their sales is after you check out. And you might say, like, what's that all about? Because they serve up people who bought this. Has that happened to you? And you click. That's machine learning. 75% of the time, the next show you're going to see on Netflix is what they serve up. They know better than you what you will like. It's true. And that's machine learning. Machine learning is doubling its capabilities every 6 months, 3 times faster than Moore's law. If you want to see it in action, I'll give you 2 ways you can see it in action. If you have a Google Home device, just say, okay, Google, be my Spanish translator. Or in this particular case, I would say, okay, Google, be my French translator. And I start speaking. It's really good French. One of our daughters is fluent in Spanish. So I said, okay, you speak in Spanish, and let's see if this is good. And you're fluent in Spanish, and you're fluent in English. I don't know any Spanish, but I know English, so let's go. It's really good. So unless you're like President Xi, who needs that kind of translator, you don't have to worry about your kids learning Mandarin. They can speak in English and just say, okay, Google. Obviously, there's no okay, Google. They say, okay, Baidu, I guess, and they have sort of an answer. That's how fast it has processed. It's moving. Here's another one. This is free. Go to a place called OpenAI. And basically, get a free license. It's free. You get 50 hits, 50 queries a month for free, and then the rest of it's really, really cheap. And you could basically say, I would like to see a kangaroo sitting in a car driving through Paris with a Renaissance sunset at the back. Within seconds, you'll have those images. Look at something called Runway ML. It allows you to create video at a highest level for almost free. And the CEO of that company basically says his vision is between the idea and the reality. There should be no friction. RunwayML.com, try it out. OpenAI, try it out. If you're a writer, go to sudo write, sudo write, and start writing, and it's just free. They'll start finishing paragraphs for you. Now imagine that doubling every 6 months. Interesting, isn't it? So that's the first one. The second one is much faster forms of connection, which is 5G. 5G is not like what 4G was to 3G. 5G has two things. It's exponentially faster and it's far more robust and resilient, so there's no signal drop-off. As a result, it's very likely that, like in Chicago, because of the nature of what I do, and we have to do a lot of stuff all over the world, I have backup systems. So I have two internet providers. So I have Comcast and I have Google Fiber. And Comcast, I have the fastest speed I can get, which is 800 megabytes. In this hotel, I haven't checked, but it's probably 50 megabytes, so it's 16 times faster than this hotel. And for good streaming, you need about 25 megabytes, so this is 800 megabytes. And then I've got a hardwire ether line from Google Fiber, which is 1 gigabyte. And I have it on two separate computers set up in two different places. So regardless of which board call I'm having to fly into in any place, I can't say my technology didn't work, because then they say, yeah, it's stupid. So I have to have a backup plan. When I go to the Verizon store, it has to be only in the Verizon store in downtown Chicago using their phone, using their transponder. I get speeds of 4 gigabytes. But the average speed will be about 2 gigabytes, which basically means you'll be able to download a high-definition movie onto your phone in 6 seconds. But that's not where the thing is. What's really cool is it basically means that all the computational power and not just storage in the future will be in the cloud, which means this, I right now have here, somewhere here, the iPhone 14 Pro Max, the most expensive thing with the 1 terabyte or 2 terabytes. It's still big. In the future, why? Everything can be in the cloud. And I can just speak. And that's coming in 2 to 3 years. So 5G. So much faster connections, data connecting to data, machine learning. 2, new types of connection. Voice. In the country of India, where I grew up, more people search through voice than through their fingers. All the great voice engineers for Google and Microsoft are in India, because India has 22 different languages. And many people are illiterate, so you speak. Coming soon is augmented reality and virtual reality. Augmented reality faster, virtual reality slower, but they're all coming. And then the last one, and you might start laughing at this, but I'm going to mention this and explain to you why what you're seeing is not what you think you're seeing, is in a world where all trust has broken down, there's one thing that I do trust in, and I've long forgotten it, but I still remember some of the horrible stuff of it. I have an advanced degree in mathematics. You can trust mathematics. And mathematics is what blockchain is. So you might say, okay, listen, clown, FTX collapsed, crypto prices have crashed. What's wrong with you? Lots of things, but not that. FTX had nothing to do with blockchain. Most of this crypto stuff has got nothing to do with blockchain. This stuff is for real, but it's so complicated and it takes time to understand that we're a few years from it becoming easy to use, but blockchain is one of the most advanced technologies ever. And it's coming. And right now, People are mixing up the signal with the noise. When the dot-com crash happened in 2001, I was running an interactive agency. My agency didn't lose a single client. We didn't have to have a single layoff. And the reason was two reasons. One is I refused to accept dot-com clients because I did not understand their business model. And the second is I went to every existing client and said, this is what you're looking at and this is what you should look at. What they were looking at was QQQ, the price of the NASDAQ index, which went from 5,000 to 1,100. So they were looking at that. And I said, okay, that's there. And I haven't figured out the exact thing for crypto yet. Not for crypto, but for blockchain. But in that case, I figured out what I had to show them. And I said, okay, you're seeing this, but let me show you this line which goes up like this, which is broadband penetration in the United States. So the number of people who were signing up with broadband. So I said, the internet's for real. This is what it is. It's not bad. Pay attention to this. Most of us pay attention to the noise, which are financial markets, and not the signal. I'm not saying the financial markets aren't a very good indicator, but the financial markets are such a good indicator that they always are right half the time, right? And they're completely wrong half the time. And just to a great extent, blockchain is coming too. So you take those four, and you're going to have completely new types of businesses. So the four things really are data connecting to data, which is machine learning, much faster connections, which are 5G, new ways of connecting, which is voice, augmented reality, virtual reality, and a new trust connection, which is blockchain. And that's going to create sort of a future of internet. For this section, and the best way of thinking about the future of technology, I have in the section called the future, I have a little thing called the future of the internet. You all should read that. It's about 1,800 words. And at the end of which there's actually a link to a presentation, which is the single presentation I've written in the last 5 years. I've written one presentation in the last 5 years, and I didn't know how to go into a boardroom and talk about the future of the internet without showing them something. So I had to actually put a deck together, which is very hard for me, but I did. And that deck is available for everybody. It's the same deck I take to a McDonald's or a General Motors or everybody. It's free, license-free, completely free, and you'll understand why, because that's a part of where the Web3 world is going. So that's there. And then there's a piece which I call Omniverse Omnipresence, which shows you everything that's going on with, OpenAI, Unreal Engine, and you can see videos, you can experiment. And those two are my education for anybody who wants to. And I suggest you do it because it's like 40 minutes and it could basically save you a lot of grief. And it's there, okay, which is very simple. So that's a little bit about that. So now, what I'd like to move to is the last one of these four shifts. Globalization, demographic shifts, technology. I'm going to the last one. And the last one is very, very real, and all of us have lived through it and are living through it, which is what the hell is going on with the office? Okay? Which is, what is going on? Which is, it's very hard to get a lot of people to come back to the office. And in most companies, they're at the highest levels that they've ever had people come back to the office today. But in almost all companies, that number is 40 to 50%. It's not 80 to 90%. It's 40 to 50%. And so there's this entire thing about, are people lazy? Do they know what they're doing? What the hell is going on? And some other people are saying, this recession will show them, whoever those people are, they have to be shown. And my whole basic belief is if you want people to come back to the office and you need a recession to do it, it's like basically cutting off your head when you have a headache. It's not the way it's going to work. When I wrote my book came out before COVID. Chapter 2 in the book basically talks about how to manage distributed workspaces. Because it was so clear to me that in 2019, we were working using 2008 and 2009 technology. And in 2020, how come we suddenly could work? And by the way, most companies, after an initial hiccup, and obviously different industries, travel, restaurants got hurt much more, but many companies had higher profits and growth with everybody sitting at home. So one day you had 100% of the employees at home. 6 months later, 100% of employees were working from, 100% office, 100% from home, and business went on for usual for 2.5 years. So how can somebody come back to you and say the office is critical for the future? People will say, what are you talking about? And then you're going to basically say, well, if you come to the office, you do these things that are so important. Like, I'll say, what? Oh, well, you can learn better. Okay, tick. Better at brainstorming. Tick. Better networking. Tick. Better relationship building. Have you heard those? Tick. Okay. Now go back to 2019, and for each of those things, when you needed to do those things, you left the office. You went to events like this to network and learn. You went to a bar to basically meet people in restaurants. You went to experiences. You went to everything but the office. You went to creative offsites. So the exact reason you want everyone to come back to the office is exactly what you left the office for in 2019. What BS? Okay, what BS? And by the way, if that was the only challenge, we'd be fine, but this office stuff is one of 8 challenges we're about to see in the next 5 years. Work is being redefined. By the way, I'm a big believer in in-person interaction. Look, I've come here. Even this year, I've done 75 flights. And there are massive benefits. But if you're going to get people back to the office, I try to tell them, A, if you don't come back to the office, I'm going to fire you. And if you don't come back to the office, without these things, we can't happen. People will look at you and say, what are you talking about? So for coming back to the office, which I do believe is the wrong answer, but the wrong question that we're solving for. Here's what we want to solve there, and then I'll give you some other challenges coming. So there's a piece which is one of my sections in that RishadTobaccowala.com/100 is called The Future of Work. And a piece there is called Returning to the Office, ? So for every organization, and it doesn't matter what your organization is, as long as it's not a dentist's office or a few other places where you have to basically be there, you can't have the dentist in one place and my teeth somewhere else. But outside of something else, you have to think about it differently. And obviously, there's lots of blue-collar workers and things. It's different. But I'm not talking about the 50% white-collar professional industry. Number one is everything that you want to talk to your companies about and your talent is how do we move forward in the year 2022 and 2023, and do not start by saying, let us go back to 2019. The moment you say go back to 2019, you are basically thinking about 2019 when you were using 2009 technology in 2019. You don't want to go back to 2019. You want to go back forward. So the first mindset is we're talking about forward, number one. Number two, there are some significant benefits to unbundled distributed work. Why do I not call it remote and hybrid? You'll understand why. First of all, remote basically makes you feel that if you're not at the office, you're an isolated, lonely person. I stopped working at Publicis, though I was an advisor, and I sat at home. And I can assure you I was not lonely. And I did not feel isolated. Because I'm not at the office doesn't mean I have no friends, I can't go talk to anybody. Right? So the idea basically is, we have to say there are some big, amazing benefits to unbundled distributed work. It's everything from you can hire more diverse talent. People can look after their kids. They can look after their parents. You can cut your costs. You can get all kinds of talent from all over the place. There are major benefits. Why would you not benefit from that? Once you start with those two, then you can talk about the third one. But by the way, ladies and gentlemen, there are many, many benefits for in-person interaction, which is true. And it varies based on industry, it varies based on age, it varies based on lots of things. But if you're young, one of the ways you learn and the ones you train is you go to boot camp, you watch things, you see things, you have mentoring, you have all of that's important. So you say, hey, by the way, we're moving forward, this stuff is important, but this stuff is important too. And as a result, let's figure out a way to create a win-win situation. And in the win-win situation, you do not have only the office, you have 4 places. And then you put together your portfolio with 4 things. You don't have bonds and cash, you have 4 things. Here's the equivalent. You have the office. For most people, the office is what I call the museum. Okay? It's where you basically have the founders' pictures, your awards, big conference rooms, indoctrination centers, etc. It's a museum. And then people like us, old fogies, like move around like old curators, muttering around about the way it used to be. Okay, excellent, fantastic, thank you very much. Okay, I'm 63, so I'm clearly over the hill there, but that's what we do, move around, okay, perfect. That's important. It's important for client pitches, indoctrination. There's a real company out here. That's fantastic. Second is we have the home, which we used to work at home all the time anyway, even before. So we have the home. Third is we basically have the third place. Many companies are basically starting to think about, okay, between the office and the home, maybe we can get some WeWork where people get together nearer their place so they don't have to travel. Another third place happens to be restaurants and bars and Starbucks and who else knows. And the last one I experienced is in events like this, or Cannes or CES, or to take people to Vegas or wherever people go, okay? With those 4, you can create amazing, amazing combinations of those 2, where you have flexibility and you have in-person interaction. Depending on your industry, depending on who you're talking to, that could be in 20 days out of 20 days at work. It could be 2 days out of 20 days at work. I don't know. I don't have the answer. Every company has to come up with something different because it's your culture, your philosophy, your competitive set, your industry. But just simply saying, let's get back to the office in 2019, and if you don't come, I'm going to shoot you, isn't going to solve anything. So that's one. But now let's think about the following things at work. And then I'll open it up for questions. So I wrote this book, and being a man, I've not given birth to a baby, but I've seen my wife give birth to a baby, too. When she had her first baby, and I hear most women say this, I'm never going to have one of these again, okay? At least for the first 15, 20 minutes and through the process, because it's damn painful. So it's like, never going to do it again. So after I finished my first book, I said, never going to do it again. Okay, never going to do it again. And then somewhere in a fit of hallucination, I sold my second book. And 4 days ago, I started writing it. And I basically said, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. Why did I do this? But anyway, I sold it to McGraw-Hill. And my second book is called Rethinking Work. Okay. And in it, I'm going to put forth what I think are the real struggles all of us are going to have, and opportunities. We are going to basically, we're going to basically have to answer the following 5 questions. Number 1 is, why do we work? For many people, they work for income, to put food on the table. That's very, very important. When I stopped working, quote unquote, I read every book I could on retirement, and I discovered that people, even if they had enough money put aside, were not very happy in quote-unquote retirement. In fact, if they completely retired, they died really fast too. And that's because we worked for 5 reasons, of which income happened to be one. We also worked because of identity. As my wife basically said, what are you going to say when people ask you, what do you do? She says, I'm an author, that's why I wrote the book. 3 is community. 4 is purpose and meaning. And 5th is growth. In today's modern world, with modern technology where you can work everywhere and all kinds of things are happening, and many, many people are aging but don't want to work full-time but want to work, we aren't set up that way. So I've written something called the fractionalized employee. We have freelance employees. Sure, thank you. We have freelance employees. This is just in time. We have freelance employees, we have contract employees, and we have full-time employees. But what about a fractionalized employee? They have all the employee benefits. Now, Canada doesn't have this issue, but in the US, you have to work 50% to get health care. You get health care, you get equity, but half-half, or whatever it is. So we have to reimagine how we bring in people when population is declining and aging. The current work structure isn't set up for that. Okay, what happens? Last week, we did a little thing where 60 of the top creatives of Publicis worldwide, we exposed them. So one of the things I do for Publicis, I MC all the executive training programs, and I do it for a few other people. And we basically gave them access to the latest technologies, trained them, and then had them fight. We had battles against the top creatives across the Publicis Groupe. So team 1 was all the top leadership, amazing, smart, and these other people were trained in this technology. We gave them an assignment, and off they went. The people with Runway ML and OpenAI and Stable Diffusion did better, faster work than all the other people, every time. To such an extent that they said, I hope clients don't access this. And I said, they do. They do, right? So what happens in a world where we're going to all work with machines, including in the creative business and the writing business? This is not just the tech business. How do we work that way? How do we work in a world where 99% of all software that's written today is written in the cloud? Nobody met to create Linux. Nobody met to create Discord. And we keep thinking of going back. Why would somebody today start a company? If someone started a company right now, and I said, I've got a blank sheet of paper with everything you know, start a company. Which demented person would basically say, all my employees are going to be in a building in downtown Toronto with high real estate costs that they have to commute to, and that's the way I'm going to operate? Nobody. Nobody, right? And that's why the future is tomorrow. It doesn't matter what the sunk costs of yesterday were. We keep thinking that sunk cost is only a fallacy, that we hate taking losses in the market, but we think that way all the time. Like, what was it in 2019? What was it in 2017? So the future of work's going to change because, and I discussed this slightly in yesterday's workshop, so this is the only part that's slightly duplicative. The difference between Gen Z and baby boomers is so significant on every characteristic. And because of the aging population, the declining population, we're basically going to have in the workplace for the first time, whatever the workplace is, people who are in their 20s and people who are in their 70s. Try that. Try the fact that most people above 60, again, maybe not in Canada, but in the United States, have grown up in basically a male-dominated Caucasian society. Now let's look at the United States under 21 years old, which is Caucasian minority. If you want to make America great again, to look like America used to be, you've got to kill everyone under 21. Otherwise, too late. Right? And so a big part of what all of us are looked at for, you all, I'm no longer working, I would not keep a job, I guess, but you all, okay, is people are looking to you to lead them into the future. And a big part of leading them into the future is to recognize what the future is. I've given you one demented person's idea of what the future is, and I'll open it up for questions. Thank you. So there are a couple of mics if anyone has a question. And I'm on time too, which is good. There's one right there.
So I asked because you've talked about you go into different companies and you have these conversations and this sort of focus on these sunk costs of yesterday. So what is it just about reimagining what we do with the real estate, right? Like we have housing crises. Is that sort of, do you see that as a next evolution of what we do with these bricks and mortar workplaces?
Yeah, so I mean, there are two things that are happening. In the city that I operate out of, which is Chicago, a lot of LaSalle Street, where all of the banks are being rezoned to become apartments. Because people had already started moving out of those to like newer buildings are being rezoned. In some cases, it's really difficult because of both electrical and plumbing and washing machines. It can't be done so easily, but that happens to be one. So people have to sort of imagine that. The other is really a big crisis on what management is, because in many cases, management used to be monitoring people, but we don't monitor. Like I often sit with senior people like myself, seasoned, I'll call ourselves seasoned, right? And I'll say, okay, look, we worked really hard to get the corner office and to be able to boss it up over all these people. And now we basically have exactly the same real estate on Zoom as they do. We're exactly one same square as they have. And what they're asking us is, what do you do besides telling me what to do? Do you do anything? Right? So a big part of it is the way we've even designed offices were kind of strange. And unfortunately, the way the offices have now been designed, they've been designed for people to come in and put on headphones and look at laptops. And someone comes into the office, and I'm on boards of many companies, and I look around and I say, there's 30% of the people here doing exactly what they were doing at home. Is this a good idea? It isn't. So a big part of it is when you reimagine offices is think about hoteling, which is places that are worth for people to come together to interact with each other. And also to think about whether you do require 2-3 days a week or do you require 3-4 days a month. But in those 3-4 days, you try really hard to get everybody back together at one time, because half being in and half being out, it could be okay for the company, but half your team being in, half your team being out becomes a real problem. So it's an entire thing of reimagining. And in this section that I write, which is called The Future of Work, I show how different companies are doing it, if that makes sense. This one right here, I believe. Oh, sorry.
Oh, right here. Sorry. Thank you very much. It was very, very interesting. Just a quick question on the overlap between two of the trends you mentioned, the third connected age and the demographic shift, where we're seeing, I run the contact center businesses both here in North America and offshore, and we are seeing, you know, a portion of our employees are 25 and under, and another portion are 55, 60, even 70 years old. And we struggle with that overlap with the connected age and just the advent of new technologies and getting that workforce that's over 65, you know, working effectively in this new connected age. I mean, how do you see that overlap happening?
It is very difficult, and I think one of the things that one has to do, the question is hard, the answer is not simple, but I'll give you 2 or 3 things that people are trying to basically do. Fundamentally, the reason I'm writing my new book is I'm revisiting those 5 questions of why we work, how we work, when we work, who we work for, and what work is. So I'll give you a statistic which might help you, which actually joins the young people to the seasoned people, but there's some commonality between the two. So one of the big things is the following. I think this is a United States number, but I think it would be projected into Canada and therefore North America, that before 2030, the majority of people will be working freelance. Okay, so in the US, it's expected to be 98 million people. And they're going to work freelance in part because of choice, because they want to work in a place, etc. But also in part because companies are going to say, why do I want to have your full cost? Why can't I have some of your costs? At the very same stage, the more seasoned people like you and I would like to work into our 70s, possibly. Again, it could be different. It could be charity work. It could be education work. It could be whatever our, like the previous person, whatever our magic, skill sets are that we maybe have not used early on when we had to pay bills and we want to do something different. And that's what's going to be part-time. But for both of the groups to do it, it's going to basically require leveraging technology and leveraging understanding of generations. So one of the things that I'm strongly recommending to companies is take your young people and pair them with old people, seasoned people, not old, seasoned people with young people. And have them teach each other stuff. Young people need the mentoring that we can give them. We're not completely bogus and useless, okay? On the other hand, they can teach us about how to both live and use technology much easier than a lot of other people can. So smart companies are now starting to pair. It's a very interesting pairing that never actually happened. And we do that actually at home. It's called grandparents and grandkids. Same thing. That's sort of one way that people are basically doing it. Because it is difficult. The way my kids who are in their 30s use technology and I use technology, even though I'm supposed to be good at it, is I look really bad. Which is the key thing. I think there's another question. Yeah.
Question here. Interesting for you to share about riding the waves increases kind of your likelihood of success with strategy. Do you feel that that's an equal opportunity regardless of the company's size, or is there should there be structures or attributes to make a company successful riding those waves? Is it an equal opportunity if I identify those four and lean into them? How do you think about that? Or I love the pairing you just shared in the previous question, but any other thoughts?
Yeah, so are these benefits applicable to any type of company regardless of size, big or small, regardless of industry? So I'll give you a more simplistic answer because obviously I don't know all the different industries and every industry has its own idiosyncrasies. But whenever you have a changing of the guard, which is what I think we're having, a changing of the guards of technology, it's a period of creative destruction where new things come. So while many established players fall, but it doesn't mean that all established players fall. And so the example I'm going to give is I'm going to give you an example of something small and something big, both of whom in one case adapted, in one case didn't adapt, and and I'm going to give this in three different categories. So just to show you that it's not just one category. So the three categories I'm going to speak about are software, automobiles, and restaurants, which I think are pretty different, right? So one's a service business, one's software, one's hardware. Software, hardware, and restaurants. Automobile. So the automobile companies, and when I'm still connected to Publicis, but when I was a Publicis, because of the size and stuff like that, we had, 7 out of the 10 biggest automobile companies as clients. And I got to visit them. So we had Mercedes as a client, we had Stellantis as a client, we had a Toyota as a client, we had General Motors as a client. And because I wasn't working in any of our agencies, I was strategist across all, I could go visit them. And they were less interested in telling me stuff, they just asked me to talk to them about what might happen. And what I began to realize is all of these companies were not seeing something coming down the pike. And as a result, they were benchmarking against each other. And because they were benchmarking against each other, they missed 2 companies. They missed Tesla and they missed Uber, which until recently were the 2 most valuable companies in that category. Because Tesla was asking the question, is the future electric and is the future software driven? And everyone running the automobile companies were internal combustion engine and hardware driven. And Uber was saying, why the hell do you need to own a car? Right? All the restaurant companies thought they were only in the business of delivering food. If you had invested in Google or Meta or Amazon, or you'd invested in this other company, which is a restaurant company, you'd have done better with the restaurant company over the last 10 years than you would have done with Google or Meta. And this is all before the Meta crash and everything, about like a year ago. And what was this company? It was Domino's Pizza. Look back at the financial records, Domino's Pizza was the best investment. Only Netflix beat Domino's among the big, FANG stocks. Because Domino's reconfigured their business to be in the logistics of pizza as much as pizza. It has, today, 23 ways you can get a Domino's. It has the very best app. And unlike a lot of the food companies, they control the entire delivery system and therefore capture all the profits. So they redefined the industry. Now I'm going to talk about a large company. So Domino's was a big company that reinvented itself. The automobile companies have now reinvented themselves and are being smart again. Now let's talk about a company that lost its way and reinvented itself. And reinvented itself so well that it's probably going to be the most valuable company, give or take, of course, Mr. Apple, okay? And this company was very successful, and then for 10 years, its stock went like this. 30 US dollars, bing, 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 okay? And it believed in certain things. It believed that they had believed in their central product was basically the way they should view the world. They believed that they needed to have employees compete with each other, and they basically believed that anybody who was outside was the enemy. 5 years ago, this company got a new CEO. And the new CEO, in the first 6 months, did the following 4 things. He basically said, number one, no more stack ranking. We're living in a world where I need my employees to compete with each other, but if every year I drop the bottom 10%, no one will talk to each other because I'm competing to keep my job. So no more stack ranking. Number two, for some reason we believe we know it all. We don't know it all. We need to learn it all. So he gave everybody a book called Growth Mindset. Okay, my name is Carol Dweck. She has the same agent that I do. That's how I got to know this little story. So she gave a book to everybody called, Third, he basically said, I think the outside world and everything else is actually good, so I'm going to partner with them. And the last is, what brought us to the party is now poison, and I'm going to close down the division. There's no more division called this anymore. The stock price went up 500% over the last 6 years. For those of you who are guessing, the company is called Microsoft. There is no Windows operating division. There's no Windows operating division, it's gone. They are the biggest contributors and believers of Linux. They own GitHub. They're going to basically, assuming that their Activision Blizzard acquisition happens, are going to be the biggest gaming company in the world. And that's how they're going to get into the metaverse. But they already are very big because they own Xbox and a few other things. So he redefined the company, a big company called Microsoft, and completely reinvented it. So to your point, I think it's actually leadership and not company size. It's got nothing to do with company size. It's basically, are you going to take calculated risks? Now, obviously, Microsoft took calculated risks. But if you're a younger company, you can be a little bit more hysterical about it. But I don't understand why people need a burning platform to jump. You should put a Bunsen burner under your butt versus letting the market put you on a gaming platform, right? And one very simple way of doing it is this, and I'll give you this exercise. And you should do this with alcohol or with drugs of other higher sorts. But here's what you do. And it's the one thing that all of you all should do. Ask yourself the following question, which is, suppose I had every single asset that I have in my current company. So just list down all your assets. And every company has lots of assets, right? So I have every single asset that I had. Okay. Include the key ones. Then you basically say, I have no constraints excepting the following three. The only three constraints you have is whatever you do has to be legal / ethical, which are two different things, but it has to be legal and ethical, number one. Number two, whatever you do has to be scientifically possible in the year 2023. Number three, whatever you do has to break even in X years. And you can decide X is 1, 2, 3, 5. Now this is when you have your alcohol. Invent the company, invent the product, invent the service. And if you don't know how to do that, think about a client or a competitor and say, how are you going to put them out of business? Or if nothing else, how will you put yourself out of business if you had your assets, none of your liabilities, but only those three constraints? What you will come up, right, after a few drinks is an amazing new company, an amazing new product, an amazing new service. At which stage I will ask all of you, why aren't you doing it? Why aren't you doing it? Because you imagined it, and someone will, right? So often, leaders do two things. Leaders like Elon Musk, Putin, the guy who ran FTX, self-defeat themselves. And they do that by crossing the line. Ethical line, human line, something. Most of the rest of us self-defeat ourselves by not daring to take risks. And there's obviously a line you don't want to go too far. But in effect, the future of your business and your next you is you. And I keep reminding people, why would you stop that? And I'll give you, and you say, okay, this guy's like a theoretical academic bullshit guy who doesn't know anything. So let me give you this little story. I'll end with this if there's no other question, and I know we're out of time. So it's 2005. The Publicis Groupe I'm now part of Publicis Groupe. Somewhere along they go and buy the companies that I'm part of, which was I came up with the Leo Burnett and other system. And a whole bunch of people at Leo Burnett and everybody else says, we don't like the French. And I said, why? Because they're telling us what to do. But I said, they paid us. We sold our company to them, so we now work for them. So you can't take their money and then say we refuse to listen to you. It doesn't work that way. Like last I heard, if someone acquires you, you have to kind of listen to them, okay? I'm not saying you have to be their servant, but you have to listen to them. They said, no, we're quitting. So I said, okay, you quit. I have to work because I'm unemployable, so I got to stay here and figure out what to do. Anyway, with a little bit of trickery, I got myself to the top 5, 6, 7 people in the company because my whole stuff was, I'm fine. I don't have a problem with you people. I'll come and help you and figure it out. And then working with some very smart people, here's what we began to see. We began to see a future where the business we were in, which was advertising primarily on television and a little bit of internet and a lot of pages of advertising, magazines and radio, was in secular decline. That we were sitting like Smith Corona, but typewriters were still cool. But we could see what was happening with typewriters. So there were two ways, and Maurice Levy basically said, we got to do something different. So here's what we did. Between 2006 and 2022, we begged, borrowed, and stole, and basically spent $10 billion buying new things. We reorganized the company. We changed a lot of management. And the company that was in 2006 had 75% of its revenue through traditional advertising. Last number that I saw, and I don't have access to the latest numbers, I'm not there, but last public number I saw, 22%. From 75% to 22%. We had 250 engineers before we did our first acquisition of Digitas. Out of 100,000 people, we have 21,000 engineers. Our business model didn't work for a long time because we didn't know how to do the people part of it right. It took a lot of drama. But right now, we are 2/3 the size of WPP, and our market cap is 50% higher, and our stock keeps going up. We figured it out. It was 10 horrible years, okay, of figuring it out. But right now, I'd rather be us than anybody else. I'm not saying everybody else isn't smart. They are, okay, but I'd rather be us. But somewhere along, somebody took really, really hard decisions and stuck to it. And now it's too late for almost anybody else, because what happened was it wasn't that the acquisitions, it was dealing with the human thing that what do you do when you take people who are creatives at Leo Burnett and combine them with data scientists at Epsilons and engineers at Sapient and other people who hate each other, and how do you actually make a model that works? And that took a lot more time than the other stuff. But that's the real thing that all of us are challenged with, all of you all are challenged with, which is one of the reasons they call us leaders is we have to make the hard decisions. And let me assure you, the reason I've now become an unemployed author is I'm not good at it like you all are. So I'll leave you with that. Thank you.